That's Jimmy Stein. I'm Clint Lamb, and this is the Cover Crimson YouTube channel. Jimmy, we got depth chart projections today. Nick Saban would be thrilled. I would love to give him a call and get his input now that he's on the media side of things. See how much I did or didn't get right. It obviously there's going to be some changes. We're not going to know exactly what the depth chart either side of the football is going to look like in May, but I feel like exiting the spring, we kind of started to get a pretty good idea of what it could look like. So I've put together some projections. Today we're going to do the offense. We'll do the defense probably next week if you're able to join.
Heck yeah.
But we'll start with your thoughts on Alabama's roster, just anything that kind of stands out to you now that spring's passed. We're starting to get into the summer. What is something, maybe it could be concerns, it could be things that you're excited about, just anything in your mind. When I say Alabama's roster, what probably stands out the most to you, Jimmy?
That I'm almost a little too optimistic. I shouldn't be this optimistic about the roster. I shouldn't be. It was a 9-3 football team a year ago that didn't perform well offensively in several of those games. Lost to Michigan, who was more or less sort of a 500 football team last year. Lost to two 500 teams during the regular season. I shouldn't look at the lineup or the roster and feel this optimistic, but I do. I was 100% on board with Alabama not being too active in the transfer portal, in part because I'm just really comfortable with where the depth chart is. And I think Alabama's roster is comparable to the best rosters this season, whether that's Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson. I think Alabama's roster is comparable to all of them. And as evidence that it's not just Jimmy opinion, I would point to recruiting rankings over the past 4 or 5 years, which have continued to be stellar, even under Kalen DeBoer. Now that the transition is complete. So I'm just really optimistic across the board about the roster. And I think it's a roster that should be able to compete at the highest levels this fall.
I'm right there with you. And that's a great way to put it, because I feel like I should not be as optimistic as I am about it. We've been optimistic. I typically look through things through an optimistic lens. Some would even say sunshine pumper at times. Like I'm just not one to really dwell on the negative. I'm always looking at the positive. Seems you're pretty close to being the same way.
Oh yeah. I get accused of the sunshine pumping all the time. It's okay.
When you look at the X's and O's, you look at the guys who are available at all these various positions, it's like we won't know until fall camp, and then we still won't really know until the season gets underway and we start seeing some of this stuff play out on the field. But it just feels like that any concerns that you would have, especially relative to the rest of college football, like I look at Georgia's roster and I'm like, hey, now granted, I don't have my ear to the ground with that program like I do Alabama's. I don't, I don't claim to know their roster as well as I do Alabama's. But, it's like I see not holes, I see question marks. And Alabama has question marks as well. But it's like what they've done to address said question marks, I'm confident in. And that could be from a roster, like a player perspective. It could be from a coaching perspective, like a play calling perspective. I feel like they did a very good job of establishing some depth this spring at a lot of key positions. We were concerned about the interior defensive line. Then you hear about Jeremiah Beeman and Edric Hill. You're concerned about offensive tackle depth. Jackson Lloyd, from reports, he's a little bit further along than maybe, someone like me who thought he was going to check in probably a little lighter than he did. He's a little bit further along than I would have thought. A guy like Olasolinen, you hear about him moving out to tackle. It's like, I get it. You need bodies out there, but do you really expect him to become a serviceable player out there? Or is he just a Band-Aid to survive fall camp with Caden Proctor on the mend? Well, come to find out, kind of had a little bit of a rough up and down start to the spring, but really came on. And now it's looking like he can provide a little bit of depth there. So that's another question mark where it gets addressed. So I'm right there with you, where it just feels like that this offense, last year you looked, especially with Jalen Hale getting injured like he did, it just felt like that really there were two true receivers who were ready for playing time that felt like Kalen DeBoer receivers. Now with Jalen Hale returning, I mean, it looks like, I mean, Enrico Scott's development and, things like that. Latsier Brooks coming in and making an impact. It feels like they've got several who fit that billing. You look at a lot of these other positions, it just feels like the offense is a lot more in Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb's image than it was last season. And I think that's pretty encouraging as well.
Yeah, it's got to be constantly reiterated that last year Kalen DeBoer inherited a roster. Now there was some movement. There was some movement. There were some true freshmen. There were some portal signees like a Keon Sabb, and there were others. But that was really largely Nick Saban's football team that he built that was being coached by Kalen DeBoer and his staff. And that's how and why transitions are as bumpy as they often are, because a new staff is basically inheriting an old roster. And they had some really good results to go along with some bad results. This year is different. This year, the roster feels more like it was formed by Kalen DeBoer. Let's remember, look at all of the different portal windows where they could have really changed out the roster. And either DeBoer and his staff chose not to push kids out that have remained, or those kids that remain chose to stay. This really feels like Kalen DeBoer's team. And is it the same roster it's going to be 2 years from now when it's literally 100% Kalen DeBoer's handpicked guys? No, but it's definitely shifted. And it feels like this is Kalen DeBoer, as evidenced by one thing I haven't been talked about too much. There's no reason to talk about it, but I think a year ago Nick Saban was present in Tuscaloosa more often than he is now. I was reminded of that today watching, today him in Birmingham along with Coach DeBoer at the golf event Birmingham. And the reason being is last year it was Kalen DeBoer's coaching Nick's team. Now it's Kalen DeBoer's team, and I think you'll see less of Coach Saban in Tuscaloosa as a direct result of that. It's just not as necessary for him to be around as it was a year ago, and that's why I think the roster looks like it does. It's DeBoer's guys.
What I love is Nick Saban handled his retirement with the utmost professionalism, like which you would have expected. But when he got done, he understood whoever's stepping into my shoes, they're stepping into big shoes. He is self-aware. He understands, he doesn't like to brag on himself or anything, but he understands how good he was at his job. But he took a step back. He didn't kind of try to be involved if people didn't call him or make direct contact. He wasn't interested in showing up at the building and giving his input. And he allowed Kalen DeBoer and Kane Womack both to do their own thing. He was there for support and support only. That was the only thing. And what I also love is that Kalen DeBoer, while there might have been some hiccups as far as, okay, should he have been disciplining some guys more? There was like this kind of conflict. You were trying to keep guys on the roster. There's some questions there, but overall, he wasn't afraid to do it his way. He wasn't afraid to play music at practice despite criticism. He wasn't afraid to wear T-shirts on the sidelines despite criticism. He wasn't afraid to people like me were saying, hey, you don't have to do it publicly, but you probably need to do something about the way Malachi Moore behaved in the Vanderbilt game. He didn't feel the pressure to share a bunch of information on that. Hey, we are disciplining him. He handled it behind the scenes. I just think that he is very confident in who he is as a coach, where his strengths lie. And I think that has been very beneficial for Alabama in this transition, because you talk so much about filling those shoes. You talk so much about, the pressure of following that kind of greatness. You got to be wired differently. And there are very few people who can handle that. I truly believe a lot of the answers that Kalen DeBoer was giving as far as his willingness to come to Alabama and kind of take on that role and not being afraid of it. I mean, I think the actions reflect that. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. He seems so comfortable in his own skin and not immune to criticism. No human being is, but he just seems comfortable, and I think the fact that people criticize him, he's going to be very aware of that, but he doesn't acknowledge it, or he certainly doesn't wear it on his face. The transition, this isn't just a normal transition, folks. A normal transition. We see that how many places per year, 130 teams. We're seeing 10, 15, 20 of these a year. That's a normal transition. But how often is the greatest of all time replaced? And to give an example, just imagine 1 year ago, those players on the team that were recruited by Nick Saban to play for Nick Saban, that got to know Coach Saban, and let's say in part due to the transition or in part due to the fact they're 18 to 22 years old, one of them had a real hard day and needed to turn to a father figure and not a parent because of something going on. Did they call Coach Saban or did they call Coach DeBoer? I mean, a year ago that was a thing, right? And I'm sure Coach Saban, being the man that he is, made himself available for that if necessary. But at the same time, you don't want to step on toes. But that's going to happen in a year one. That's absolutely going to happen in a year one. Now it probably won't, or if it does, it would be rare. Now these guys have gotten to know Coach DeBoer. They've gotten to know their assistants. They've gotten to know the people around the building. A lot of them were retained, in the support staff roles, the Clint Dix, Josh Chapman, that type guy. So I think the transition has really gone as well as you could hope. I know the wins and losses weren't what Alabama fans would like to have seen, and it wasn't just 9-3. There's a couple different ways to go 9-3. Alabama kind of went a bad 9-3 because of two of the losses. I mean, I don't think losing on the road to Tennessee is so shameful in a transition year. They made the playoff even, but I know the one loss record didn't go as people think, but off the field and looking at Kalen DeBoer, like you were talking about, how he seems so comfortable. In that sense, I think this transition's gone far better than, frankly, I had imagined, because for the past 2, 3, 4 seasons, I've been spending time imagining what this was going to look like because it was coming. And I would say off the field, it's been more smoothly than I'd imagined it. It's just that on the field there were maybe a couple more bumps than I would have guessed.
That's 100% correct. I couldn't have put it any better. I think that is, if you're an Alabama fan, has it been perfect? Not even close. It was never going to be perfect. That's the thing. It didn't matter who you brought in. They were going to struggle with this. Do I handle it my way or do I continue to do it the Nick Saban way? I think Kalen DeBoer, he was confident enough in himself and his staff where if there were things that the players liked that Nick Saban and the previous staff did, there was a balance between adopting some of that and then doing it their way. Like there was this mutual respect of we have certain things, we're going to do it our way. We also understand you guys have done it a certain way ever since you've been here. When you've got the Malachi Moores who have been around for forever, other players, Jalen Milroe would have been around for several seasons. It's like, a lot of that is you need to also have respect for the players and kind of making sure they're comfortable because that's another big problem is that sometimes through these transitions, you're so worried about making yourself comfortable in a new environment that you forget that the guys, your guys, they're going through a massive transition too, and it's new for them, and you're trying to keep them as comfortable as possible while also not doing it to the detriment of how you operate and do things. So I think while there were some hiccups, there were always going to be some hiccups. I think this has gone about as smoothly as it possibly could. And the fact that I feel like the roster is already in this kind of shape. Last year, it was all of the hype surrounding Alabama and what Kalen DeBoer could be in year one was based off of pure talent on the roster. There wasn't a whole lot of consideration taken into the fit of that talent. There wasn't a whole lot of taken into consideration as far as how the transition was going to go and operate. It was just Alabama has from a star perspective, a high school recruiting rankings perspective, they have one of the most, if not the most talented rosters in college football. But there's so much more to it than that. Otherwise, Texas A&M, under Jimbo Fisher, when he signed in those recruiting classes that he was, they probably would have had a little bit more success than they did. There's more to it. So I do think that he's done about as well as he possibly could. Let's get into the depth chart, and I'll go ahead and pull it up here.
Nice.
And so
it's we'll like a work of art.
I did spend a lot of time on this, and hopefully
hang it in the Louvre.
Now here, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go ahead and highlight everything, and as we talk about or highlight these positions, I'll put them up specifically. But this is just my projections. Not everybody's going to agree. I'm sure there will be a lot of agreement here, but we'll start with the quarterbacks. The way that I have it, at least on the chart for those that are listening in podcast or on the podcast, I have Ty Simpson listed as the starter. On my actual projections that I did on at covercrimson.com, I did an or status with Austin Mack and Keelan Russell. Still feel like I think Ty is trending towards being the starter. I don't think we've yet determined who the number 2 guy is going to be. Jimmy, are you on board with that belief, or would you kind of have it differently?
No, I would line them up exactly as you did here on the depth chart that you're showing on the YouTube. Ty Simpson, then Austin Mack, then Keelan Russell, because I think that's how it looks today. I just think that Keelan Russell, being the guy that just got there, that doesn't know the scheme, that's still learning the playbook, that's still learning where the cafeteria is, that's still learning where the bathrooms are. He's still learning. So Keelan is more likely than any of the other 2 to make huge leaps forward. I think, Ty is I'm not saying he is what he is, because that doesn't sound like a polite way to say things. Ty's going to get better, especially as he plays and gets all these QB1 reps. But I'm just saying Keelan Russell's a riser here. And if this is wrong, if this proves wrong, it's because of where Keelan is. But that's exactly how I would line it up right now. Ty Simpson, then Austin Mack, and then Keelan Russell. I think that's how it should be. And I think that's how it is.
So, with the quarterbacks, talking about fit within the offense, I think all 3 of these guys fit more of what Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb want to do or are going to do more than Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe is an immensely talented guy. I mean, there's a reason that he was a day 2 draft pick, had, in a lot of ways, some first round traits. But as far as some of the things that maybe he did well or did at an elite level, didn't really mesh with where Kalen DeBoer and at the time Nick Sheridan wanted to win, right? We've never seen Kalen DeBoer put a huge emphasis on the quarterback's legs and being a volume runner. Granted, he's had some dual threat guys, and obviously you're going to adjust to your player's strengths. But I'm saying when you look at him and the way he likes to operate more on a grand scale, that's not where he kind of lives, right? Gus Malzahn, he's going to use the quarterback's legs. That is a required element. For Kalen DeBoer, it is not. It's winning from in the pocket. It's timing. It's getting good play at the wide receiver positions. It's your offensive line being able to do a lot of different things. That's how the offense operates. With Ty Simpson, I like what he could bring as far as winning from the pocket. Now, granted, I don't want anybody to get confused. He's not Jalen Milroe from a rushing perspective, but he certainly is a dual threat player. He's effective on the ground. And, I think he's going to scramble and when things break down for sure, but also there might be some times where things aren't breaking down around him like he thinks that it is, and he bails and tries to make a play outside the pocket. Like, that is very much who he is as a player as well. I just think that he's going to be willing to stand in there a lot more and be able to do what's required when you are standing in there a lot more, delivering and distributing the football.
Yeah, I think it's best illustrated by this. I think this would shock a lot of people to know that DeBoer and Grubb, their final season at Washington, they coached a kid with not only first round traits but a first round pick, and Michael Penix, who went 8th overall. I think it might shock people to know if they didn't know this, but Michael Penix, when he went to Indianapolis, he ran a 4.5 40. He ran in the 4.5s at Indianapolis. I think that shocked people because he didn't run at Washington. He hardly ever ran at Washington. He just threw the ball. There was the designed quarterback run was just not much of a thing up there, despite the fact that Penix is a fairly big kid that can run a 4.5 and could have been a real weapon with that kind of speed, particularly going with the arm talent. But he didn't run. So DeBoer gets to Alabama, and now he's got Nick Sheridan, and they look at the quarterback and they figure out, rightfully, in my opinion, the best weapon we've probably got here at Alabama is the quarterback's legs. So we're not going to do the Penix thing where we hardly ran at all. We're going to sort of build it around the QB run because I think that's what we do best, or what will be the best weapon we have. So as we improve on Jalen as a passer, let's kind of build it around his legs. Well, that was a smart thing to do, but think about the level of that transition, not just on Jalen Milroe's part, going to his 3rd offensive coordinator and 3rd different offense in 3 years, really, to DeBoer and Sheridan. That's a giant change for them. They haven't built it around the quarterback run. They didn't do it at Fresno with Jake Hayner. I'm sure that at some point they did it at Sioux Falls. I'm sure they had somebody, but no one's ever looked that up. But point being, what a huge. So now they got Ty Simpson. And you know what? Ty's a little like Penix in this way. Ty runs well too. Just like Penix ran that 4.5 in Indy, and I think people were shocked because he didn't really run. I think if Ty doesn't run much this fall, people might be shocked at how fast he is. We as Alabama fans know he's fast. We saw him run for the 70-yard touchdown or whatever, where he dropped the ball at the 1-yard line, and we all remember that. But we know Ty can really run. But I think much like you saw at Washington in 2023 with Michael Penix, I don't know that we'll see a lot of that. I think this year will look a lot more, not exactly by any means, but a lot more like 2023 Washington looked, because they can go back to doing what they're doing when they had an athletic quarterback like Penix, but one they felt very comfortable throwing the ball downfield and taking advantage of what were Washington's best weapons, 3 amazing NFL wideouts. I think it was like a first, a second, and a third round pick, I think. But they had 3 great wideouts, tight ends that can catch the ball, a running back that could. They had a lot of good weapons around the quarterback, and they kind of built it that way. I just like Ty's fit based on what they were doing at Washington versus Milroe, where they clearly just flipped it all upside down based on what they were doing, which was the right thing to do. But there was going to be bumpy moments because of the enormity of that transition.
Correct. Yes. And when you watched Penix, one of the things that might surprise people, very effective from the pocket. Also, when he wanted to, was an effective runner. He had the athleticism. One thing that I don't think he was as good at as you would think was throwing on the move. When things broke down and he got outside the pocket, that's probably where he was the worst. I think that's kind of a differentiator as far as Ty Simpson, because I think he's a better thrower on the move. But I also don't think Ty is Michael Penix in the pocket. He's that caliber. Even though I think he's very good, that is what really sent Michael Penix to a different level. There's a reason he was a top 10 draft pick. But one of the other things is when it comes to the offense and how the quarterback run is going to fit into it, I don't think it's going to be design quarterback runs anymore. You might get the occasional, but I think it's more so when, it's unscripted runs. As things break down, a guy takes off. Mm-hmm. What I'm hoping is, if it is Ty Simpson, and I'm not saying this from a talent perspective, but I'm saying I hope he operates similarly to Joe Burrow at LSU, in the sense of Joe Burrow was a much better athlete than he was ever given credit for, was a lot more mobile. Did they have a ton of design quarterback runs? No. But he was very smart as far as understanding, based off of what the defense was giving him, hey, I've got an opportunity where I can use my legs. Sometimes that was things breaking down post-snap. Sometimes that was him understanding what was probably going to be there, even pre-snap. And he would use his legs and have the athleticism, and it always kept defenses on its heels. And that's something that I think Ty is capable of. Not saying it's going to be to the extent of Joe Burrow, but where if he can be a timely runner and understand how that's going to fit in with all the rest of the pieces like Joe Burrow, that can make Alabama's offense extremely dangerous, Jimmy.
Oh, and, I heard, I think it was Nick Saban say this during draft coverage when they're talking about Milroe during draft coverage. He said, one thing about Milroe, he's so athletic, Alabama didn't see much man coverage when Milroe was the quarterback, because you can't have the defenders with their back to the play. All the defenders, if they're turning around and running with their guy, and they don't see what's happening back at quarterback, Milroe's going to kill you with his legs. So Alabama didn't see a lot of man. Now they will. That's back. That's back. Alabama versus man defense. And guess what? Ty can hurt you. Ty can hurt you with that quarterback run like this. So I like exactly what Clint said. I agree 1,000,000%. What can be really effective now is the scramble. What can be really effective is in Ty's earpiece when he's talking to either Ryan Grubb or Nick Sheridan. I guess I don't know if that's been worked out. I assume it's going to be Grubb. But when Ty's talking to Ryan Grubb in between plays, and Grubb's like, "Hey, they're giving us this run here. Just take it on the next snap. They're giving us that." I think when it's there to be taken, Ty's going to take it. But like you said, I don't think they're not going to build the offense around the read option. They're not going to build the offense around quarterback design runs, the quarterback sweep, the quarterback draw. I think that'll all be minimized. But Ty is going to make plays with his legs. Hopefully he picks and chooses the right moment, because it can be a real weapon.
It absolutely can. Yeah. And with Alabama's previous two quarterbacks, like there was like little tells or things that defenses would do. Like with Milroe, it's, hey, he's not going to step up in the pocket. He's going to flush backwards, and then he's going to try to escape out. Right. And that was something that defenses could take advantage of. With Bryce, one of the big things they did, it was the Harold Perkins LSU thing, where it's, hey, we got to create a lot of chaos in the pocket in front of Bryce because he's shorter. He's a guy that when he can't see, he'll escape. And as soon as he escapes, we've got a spy ready. Now we're immediately applying pressure. We're not going to allow him to make plays and have a lot of time when he starts to scramble. That's where he's the most dynamic. And so that kind of those limitations hurt Bryce at times. With Ty, he's going to have his own thing, but I just, he doesn't have to worry about the height thing like Bryce did. And he's a lot more pocket aware as far as his willingness to step up in the pocket. Not saying he's not going to do some of that Milroe would do, but I'm just saying I think he's a little bit better about that, which I think is ultimately going to help in the way that Alabama is going to want to operate offensively. Let's move on to the running backs. So the way that I have this listed is I just put it RB1, RB2, mostly because I didn't want to put 6 names underneath one. I have the top 3 guys, my projected top 3 guys, all listed under the running back 1, and then the other 3 kind of rounding it out. So I have Jam Miller, Richard Young, and Daniel Hill as the top 3 guys. And then I have Draylon Washington, A.K. Deere, and Kevin Riley as the next 3. And granted, Kevin Riley, A.K. Deere, it could really work out either way. But that's kind of how I see it. And I'm going to tell you, Jimmy, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on Daniel Hill. But, I mean, this is a guy who I really think can push for a significant role in Alabama's offense. Now, that will come at somebody's expense, and I don't like looking at it from that angle because I couldn't tell you at whose expense. Is that going to be Jam all of a sudden taking a big step back in his usage? Doubt it, especially when he could have transferred or went somewhere else. It's kind of the Damian Harris thing. Like Josh Jacobs, he recently went on a podcast and talked about he didn't think he would be a first-round draft pick because he wasn't even the starter. But it was more of Damian Harris could have come out the previous season. He could have been a third-round draft pick like he ended up being, but he chose to come back to Alabama because Nick Saban thought, okay, with you being a third-round pick, I'm really not going to push for you to leave early. And if you do that, what you don't want to do is that to not reward that guy, move him to a secondary role, ride Josh Jacobs, and now his draft stock is hurt because it's going to affect guys making similar decisions in the future. And Damian Harris was more than serviceable. He was a really good player, ended up being a third-round pick. So it wasn't like a whole lot was being sacrificed by having him on the field. So, I think Jam Miller is going to be the guy, is my point in saying that. I think Richard Young's going to be a part of it, but I mean, don't count out Daniel Hill, Jimmy.
Yeah, I mean, I would line them up basically exactly as you did. You could maybe nitpick on Deere and Riley, but that's if Alabama gets down to the 5th and 6th guy, they're really going to have an issue. But that said, I'm not super confident in. I wouldn't want to wager on what the carries are going to look like over the course of the season. I mean, I would bet I'm kind of a conservative when it comes to this. I would say Jam Miller is going to be the starting back all year, and he'll have the most carries, and Rich Young will be the number 2 back, and he'll have the second most carries and the second most production, and then Daniel Hill third, and so on. I would line them up just like that, and that's what I would wager on a force to. But I think a better bet than that is kind of anything could happen there. I'm not going to be shocked if, frankly, any one of maybe 4 or 5 guys ends up being the number 1 back, because to be honest, to this point, I don't know that Jam Miller has done enough for us to assume that he should be the number 1 back from game 1 through game 12. I think Jam Miller, even though he's in year 4, is still a little bit in prove it mode. He's earned the first shot, and he's earned maybe the first snaps against Florida State, but I still think he's got to win the position. I don't think he's entrenched there as RB1. I think Rich Young's going to get a shot to be that guy. I think Daniel Hill earned that shot this spring. I'm pretty high on Dre Washington. Now, I kind of expected to see maybe a more splashy entrance for Dre Washington than we saw this spring. Really, it was Daniel Hill. If anybody was kind of splashy this spring as a younger back, it was Hill. AK Deer certainly looks the part, maybe more so than any of them. But he looked like a freshman, looked like a deer that was kind of, I'm going to use the deer analogy, of course. That he looked a little bit more like a fawn than a 8-point buck, this spring. But he could sprout those horns this fall and be the guy. Kevin Riley, by the way, is the fastest of any of those backs. I mean, Kevin Riley's the best home run hitter in the whole room. So I don't know. I would almost want to say, hey, who's going to be the leading rusher? If my guess is Jam Miller or the field, I would go with the field. But now I would, I hate betting against Jam because of the experience. And I do think that we haven't seen the best of Jam yet because he's a little robbed last year. I think it was a difficult offense for him and Justice Haynes last year. That RPO quarterback option read offense sort of took up a lot of the oxygen, and the traditional run game just wasn't there. So I think we'll see a better Jam than we've ever seen. But based on the Jam we've seen so far, I think the room is so crowded with talent. I'm not sure how it's going to shake out.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Here's the thing. Sometimes we talk about like Trent Richardson was doing some dude things, but he did have a guy in Mark Ingram who was also a complete unit, who was also doing some things too. We talk about, the Josh Jacobs, where it's like, okay, this guy, when he was getting put on the field, pretty much from his freshman season, he was doing some things, but the guys ahead of him were doing some things too, right? Yeah. And that's what I guess is the biggest question mark for me. We think that's going to be a similar situation, but what I will say is I can see a scenario where Daniel Hill is just doing some dude things, and maybe some of the other guys are not Mark Ingram or not Damian Harris or some of these guys. And it's like, at that point, you might start seeing them rod Daniel Hill. Like, he might become more of a workhorse than any of us would realize or anticipate. Not saying the other guys would completely go away and this would be a Dylan Johnson at Washington type of situation. But I mean, I can see that scenario playing out. A lot will depend on what these guys are going to do when they get their opportunities. But right now, you're seeing it in practice. The coaching staff, I mean, typically when I've heard these types of things about a guy like Daniel Hill, it is normally translated pretty well to Saturdays, meaning that type of buzz, what he's bringing, the element that he's bringing as far as being able to consistently churn out yardage, the fact that he's seeing things extremely well, the fact that he's got good pass catching ability, he's a big, powerful back. Really curious and interested to see how he looks in pass protection, but I think he's probably going to be effective on that front. Like, I could see that scenario with the running backs. Draylon Washington's really interesting to me because he's a guy who had 1 year of eligibility, and it's like, man, did he? Now, he had to know there was some risk. Like, you were in a committee at Louisiana, you weren't even like the workhorse there, so there was no guarantee that you were going to step into the SEC and even get what you were getting there. So, I mean, he had to know that there was some level of risk, but it would be unfortunate if he transferred in and really wasn't a part of Alabama's, a consistent part of the rotation, because anytime that happens, it becomes a little bit more difficult to try to get the next guy in there. So, I'll be curious to see what the running back room and distribution of touches ends up looking like. But I could see it working out in a number of different ways. Here's what I will say, though. I think regardless of where it comes from, I think due to the other elements of the offense and the threats that they're going to provide and the fact that they're going to stay ahead of the sticks a little bit more this season, stay on schedule a little bit more, the offensive line, I think, is going to be a little bit more improved. The attention that the wide receivers are going to be getting, the fact that you've got an effective pass catcher at tight end, I think the opportunities are going to be there for the running backs, and I think they'll end up doing pretty well with it. Let's move on to the receivers. So and this is always, you've got first of all these guys are going to move around. And so while I like doing the XZH or the slot in all of my projections, and I always have, you're gonna, I mean, like Rico Scott, he's gonna be listed at one spot, but he's gonna play.
Right.
He could really play all three. Jeremy Bernard can really play all three. Probably more of a Z slot. So is Rico Scott, but they can play the X as well. Ryan Williams, I have him starting at the Z, but he can. Last year he was the X, and he will play a lot of X. He'll play in the slot some. He's definitely going to be a guy they move around. Isaiah Horton has played just a ton, pretty much all of his snaps on the perimeter. Now Miami had a pretty good slot receiver. Who was a slot guy and really wasn't an outside option for them. So that could have limited the amount of opportunities that Isaiah Horton got in the slot. But I just think when you look at him, the big slots become a more common thing, and whether it be on the college and the NFL level. So I'm not saying he can't play in the slot, but I am saying just when I look at Kalen DeBoer's offenses in the past, I'll look at Isaiah Horton. I don't see a guy who's going to spend 40% of his snaps inside. I see more of the Rome Odunze 20-80 split, 80 outside, 20 inside. But so this is how I have it. Now, for the podcast listeners, always got to remember at the X, I have Isaiah Horton with Jalen Hill backing him up, and then Derek Meadows rounding out that position. At the Z, I have Ryan Williams being backed up by Rico Scott with Jalen Mbakwe checking in as the number 3 guy there. And then at the H, I have Jeremy Bernard starting. I have Latsier Brooks backing him up ahead of Cole Adams, even though I have it as an or status. I do want to give the nod at the fact that I did list the freshman first. And then as the 4th H or slot, I have Bubba Hampton. So, Jimmy, what do you think about this wide receiver group?
I love how you've lined them up. I mean, it's almost a work of art there. It just shows a couple things. Number one, I'm so excited about the first 3, the starting guys on line 1. You know, Horton, Bernard, and Williams, I think is our best, or Alabama's best trio since going back a ways. As far as best trio, you have to go back probably before 2021 when it was really Metch and really Slade Bolden was a 3rd receiver when it was Metch and JMO, right? I mean, this is as good a trio as they've had since 2020,
Right.
I think. And that's exciting. But what's even more exciting is depth that just hasn't been there. I'm not even sure it was there back then in terms of going 6, 7, 8, 9 deep, but this group really does. And I like how you've lined them up. It's true they'll all move around, but I just kind of look at, who's going to catch the balls here, and it's going to be Ryan and Germ and Horton. And then it's just kind of a mystery. The good news is it's a mystery because these guys are so good. Last year it was a mystery because you didn't know who it would be because no one was stepping up to be the 3rd guy. This time, I think there's a bunch of candidates stepped up to be a 4th guy. The depth is great. The first 3 are just star future pros. I think all of them are high picks, day 1 or day 2 picks, all 3 of them. And I love the depth, and I love how you've lined them up here. And Ty Simpson is got a good situation. I mean, if you want to be a young quarterback making his first starts, the best gift you can give him are open receivers who can make a play after they have the ball in their hands, and Ty's going to have that.
I don't think all these guys, pretty much the entire room's going day 1 or day 2, but I could make an argument for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a bare minimum 6, potentially going into 7 or 8 eventually. Like Latsier Brooks, I wouldn't be shocked if he eventually became a 1st-round draft pick.
Based on what I saw this spring, I would not bet against that, people.
Yes. And I mean, even a guy like Derek Meadows, from a physical standpoint, have no idea. And I didn't include him in that 6, but like that's one it's like, I don't know. I mean, but he could end up being an absolute freak. He's a much more further along than I thought he was going to be.
And I love Rico Scott.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Rico Scott. I mean, he's quickly kind of, the last several years, I've bounced around. Like there's been so many options from like a talent standpoint and how they're going to fit in, where it's like I've gone through the summer and stuff and I've kind of bounced around as far as who I was high on everybody, but who I was really pushing. I mean, I'm starting to kind of settle in. Everybody kind of is in agreement on the top 3. For me, Rico Scott is checking in as that 4th guy.
Yeah.
And then I have Latsier Brooks being a surprise wide receiver 5. And
I don't bet against that.
And, and that's ahead of Jalen Hill. Now, granted, I think Hill probably would be the 6th. And then from there, like 7 and 8, I have Cole Adams and Jalen Mbakwe. Now, I will say this.
Ridiculous.
Go find me a wide receiver 7 and 8 that's even remotely on those 2 guys' level. Like, that is absolutely bonkers.
There's starters at some programs in the SEC, Kalen
Today.
and Bakwe today. I mean,
Yes.
I think they would be ones, certainly athletically. I like Rico. Rico reminds me. I think this comp gets overused, but he reminds me of John Mechie quite a bit, just simply because I think at the same age, they're very similarly sized, and I would guess their 40 times are going to be remarkably similar. And I think they just both have a knack for playing the position. What Mechie brought to the table was, I would call, extreme physicality to go along with it. And I think Rico is still in the development phase. He hadn't got to where Mechie got, at the end. But I think in terms of a year two Rico, probably a very similar to a year two John Mechie.
Yeah, I mean, and with Mechie, you always saw like he was an inside out option for Alabama. And he did a much better job when you look at him and his size and the way he was built, because very had kind of a compact build, very it definitely wasn't Kendrick Law, but just a more compact build. But he won downfield a lot more effectively than you would think for a guy who was built like him. But it's like you kind of knew going to the NFL, he's probably going to be a slot and he's not going to play a ton on the outside. With Rico, I don't see that. I see him playing in the slot quite a bit, but I think he's a guy that would be able to move around a little bit more, and he could play quite a bit outside for you if you were an NFL team eventually. And so I agree with it, especially when it comes to like the recruiting rankings and kind of where they were at. And, we had heard some buzz about this guy going into even last year. Didn't end up, I mean, obviously we weren't really expecting like a Latsir Brooks type of impact or anything from him, but we were excited about what he could potentially become. And he's very much on track for that. So that is encouraging. I mean, and the thing about Adams and Mbakwe that I've talked about before on this show, do feel like punt returner, kick returner, get those two guys involved there where they're also making an impact on the team, even though it might be situational, very situational snaps, emergency snaps on offense, like if they have to work into the depth a little bit. But just I feel really good about this wide receiver room. It's easily one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country. And I 100% agree with you in the sense of this is the best trio that Alabama has had since the rideouts, because really you're 100% correct. Jameson Williams and John Mechie, that was just a twosome. But also the depth of this room exceeds the rideouts. So I love how you put that. I completely agree. That is an excellent point.
No, I'm not comparing, and I know neither one of us are saying, hey, this is the Ruggs, Waddle, Jerry, Jeudy group. I'm not saying that, and I don't think you are either. I'm just saying it's the best since that group. Right. And this is deeper than that group in terms of there's literally more players who can make plays in SEC games in that group. Because I don't know that we'll ever have, that 3 or 4 guys that we had at one time. I don't know that we'll ever see that again.
Yeah, 100% true. And that's kind of like Alabama hadn't had this much NFL talent, whether you're talking about day one or day two at the position since then. Do they have 4 first-round picks? Probably not. I know Jeremy Bernard has been projected by some to be in the first. I guess it's possible that he could be that Emeka Egbuka type of player where, like, just it doesn't do anything really on an elite level necessarily. Doesn't have like didn't really win downfield like you would expect, but just does everything well enough where you're like, he's a first-round talent. Is that possible? Maybe. I just don't really think I would more so put him as a day 2 guy. And I think Isaiah Horton, he's got day 1 upside as well. I would probably have him day 2 right now just because it's kind of an unknown. But could I see him taking the JMO route? Yes, I can. Not having 1,500 plus yards necessarily. I'm not saying that because of the other guys in the room, but I am saying, a guy that goes from being like, hey, this is a pretty darn good player, going to add an element to Alabama's offense, to being talked about as a potential first-round draft pick. I could see that. Not saying it's going to happen, just saying I could see it. As far as the tight end room, and the way that I've got it divided up is the Y's and the H's, the inline guys and the move H guys. I have Danny Lewis starting as the first inline, backed up by Brody Dalton and Jay Lindsey, and then Jack Samarco, the transfer from West Virginia, being the 4th guy there. And then at the H, the move tight end, I have Josh Cuevas with Marshall Pritchett and Caleb Edwards both backing him up. Now, here's the thing. Jack Samarco is a massive, massive body. Like, I would not be shocked if at some point, if he continued to get bigger, he ended up playing offensive tackle. But I could also see him being a massive move tight end, kind of like Robbie Utes. So
Like
while I have him listed as an inline guy at that Y spot, I could also see it where you flip Jack Samarco and Caleb Edwards, because Edwards can play either one. You put Edwards as an inline guy. You put Samarco right there behind Josh Cuevas at the H, where you've got a nice little balance there with the H's, kind of like you did this past season where you had Oots, the blocker, you had Josh Cuevas, the pass catcher, and then you had the Y in CJ Dupree, who could kind of, obviously much more effective as a blocker, but, could do it all to an extent. Is there anything you would switch or change about the tight ends?
No, not at all. I've laid it out there with the caveat that just because you're listed as a wide doesn't mean you won't be seen at H, because I think that's what would happen. I think if you look how you've lined it up, which is, almost certainly the same way I would too, I would just, again, say that, the depth at Y is really good in terms of guys that I think we will see play in the games, guys that will take snaps with the ones, Lewis, Dalton, even Lindsey and Samarco. I think they take snaps with the ones in the games. And at H, I would only say it's going to be Cuevas. That means that Dalton, Lindsey, and Samarco, in some order or in some way, they'll also be taking snaps, I think, at the H spot here and there. And I like what you said about Samarco, True. But I think Brody Dalton being such an experienced, kind of fifth-year senior guy, I think we're going to see a lot of the 12 personnel alignment and a lot of these tight ends. But the primary ones will be, let's not get away from, Danny Lewis is going to take the most snaps at Y, and Josh Cuevas will take the most snaps at H. And because Cuevas is going to catch the most balls, I think fans are going to identify Josh Cuevas as the tight end on this football team. But that's just because there's a bias with fans in terms of watching the ball and who's going to catch the balls. That's going to be Cuevas. I do think they will throw the ball to the Y at times to keep defenses honest and make the defense cover that guy. So there will be some throws, and Danny Lewis can catch it. He's actually a pretty decent receiver. But Josh Cuevas is going to lead that room in receptions. And so for that reason, I think he'll just sort of be recognized as the principal tight end in Alabama's offense. But I wouldn't be surprised if Lewis plays the most snaps.
Absolutely. And one thing about it, this offense, curls and seams. Those are the two big routes that they're going to want to run. Very rarely ran slants, by the way. I mean, just has not really been in the playbook. Don't know if that's going to change. I don't know if that was quarterback related. I mean, I think to an extent it was, but I also think, DeBoer and them, they have certain things they want to lean on. But those seams, that's an opportunity for your tight ends. And so I'll be curious to see how much more involved they are, because I do think they're going to have a bigger role. Now, here's the thing. You say that, and then you wonder, okay, but you're also trying to get a bunch of pass catchers involved at receiver. You're trying to get a bunch of guys carries at running back. I mean, there's only so many snaps to play in a game. So if Josh Cuevas ends up being one of those guys who gets 50 targets or 60 targets or has 40-plus catches like we think that he can, I mean, like I say with everything, at whose expense? It could be, wide receiver 5. You might have 5 playing, but you might only see 4 getting, kind of like Washington's offense with Bernard when he was acting as that wide receiver 4. A lot of his targets and opportunities came through injury and him filling in, but also even when everybody was healthy, he would still get rotated in. He would still get targets. I think that's bare minimum going to be Alabama, where you got 4 guys who are fairly consistently involved at wide receiver. I think you probably are playing 5, maybe even 6. And then your tight end is getting pretty heavily involved from a pass catching perspective as well. Anything else in the tight ends before we move on to the final position of the offensive line?
No, I think you got that covered really well. And I don't think, Alabama doesn't have Brock Bowers, but if you don't have a Brock Bowers, and almost no one does, the next best thing you can hope for is to have the personnel to mix and match based on situation. And I think Alabama's got a really good situation there with multiple bodies they can use at the line of scrimmage when you want to get big. And then they've got a weapon to throw the ball to in the tight end room and Josh Cuevas.
I want to point out to people, go ask Washington fans about the importance of Jack Westover. He was their tight end, a former walk-on, ended up being, going undrafted, wasn't anything special from an NFL talent perspective, but understand his importance on Washington's roster and how pivotal he was to helping them get to the national championship because of what he provided, both as a blocker, as a move blocker, but also as a pass catcher. He did have kind of that 55, 60 targets, 40 plus catches, not a ton of yardage, but it's more so what the tight ends do as far as whether it be, spacing out defenses vertically or creating horizontal space. I think that Josh Cuevas fans, he's not going to be one of Alabama's top NFL talents from that perspective, but I think maybe in the sense of who would I compare it to? Maybe a Brad Smelly. I'm trying to think if there would be anybody else who I mean, maybe Miller Forrestall to an extent when he was healthy, but I would say probably like a Brad Smelly, but even more important than that. Like I think where it's like you understood his role in the offense and it was a pretty big deal. So don't want to forget about those tight ends. Think there's a reason that the coaching staff has put an emphasis on this position. They're recruiting multiple high level players at this position for 2026. They want to bring that balance because they understand the importance of that spot. And if they can get the right guy, it can become a featured piece of the offense. Right now, I would say it's a lot more complimentary, but it plays a pivotal role. All right, with the offensive line, Jimmy, I have Caden Proctor at left tackle with Olasolinen backing him up, and Jackson Lloyd is the number 3 left tackle. I have an or status with Cam Dewberry and Gino Vandermark at that left guard spot, but I have Dewberry listed first. Then I have Mal Waldrop and Micah DeBose as the third and fourth string guys there. I have Parker Brailsford as the starting center with Joe Ionata and Rock Montgomery both backing him up. I have Jaden Roberts starting at right guard with William Sanders being the number 2 and Casey Poe being number 3. And then at right tackle, I have Wilkin Formby with Michael Carroll as the number 2 and Arkel Anugum as the number 3. So, granted, I only listed these guys in one spot. So Gino Vandermark, he's the backup center. If Jaden Roberts goes down at right guard, he's going in there. I don't have him listed at all 3 spots though, and I don't think Alabama will either. But what are your thoughts? And is there anything that you would change?
No, it's just, a depth chart such as this or an administrative grouping as Saban preferred. It doesn't take, I think, into account reality of like what would happen if maybe, let's say, Parker Brailsford got hurt. I think if you just look at the depth chart and you're like, oh, Parker Brailsford gets hurt, then Ionata comes in. No, that's not how this would work. And I know
Yes.
that, and people at home or in their cars need to know that too. I think we both agree if Brailsford got hurt at center, the new center is going to be Vandermark. I mean, he's going to. So the way I kind of look at it is that I agree. By the way, if you're starting 5 as it's laid out here, by the way, Proctor, Dewberry, Brailsford, Roberts, and Formby, I think those are the 5. And Vandermark today would be the first interior guy off the bench, just as he was a year ago, and probably a year better. So it's actually a better depth situation in the sense that Vandermark, a year older, a year better, a year more comfortable in Tuscaloosa. He's probably the first guy off the bench at left guard, center, or right guard. And then with Proctor and Formby as a starting tackle, I think a huge development this spring is maybe Olas has proven that he could be the first tackle off the bench. You really weren't sure about that. But he, I think, showed this spring that he can be the first tackle off the bench if something happens with Proctor or Formby. What I would just say finally is the great news for Alabama is in terms of that guy off the bench. For now, it's Vandermark on the interior, but watch out for Michael Carroll. He's going to be coming and getting better and better and better and better. And at tackle, that guy's Jackson Lloyd. I mean, for right now, it's Olas, but Jackson Lloyd's going to be getting better, 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 and better. So between that starting group, which is really good, and the depth of Vandermark, Olas, Big Mike Carroll, Jackson Lloyd, maybe a guy that's played like Rock Montgomery has played some. I think that the depth is better. The numbers in the room are better. But all anyone should really care about until ankles start being turned is the starting 5. And it probably is the best one. But Hey, I've probably been guilty of anyone as overestimating how good the offensive line was going to be since 2021 when it wasn't great. It wasn't great in 2021, and frankly, it hasn't really been great in any year since 2020. And I keep saying over and over again, this is the best one since 2020. This is the best one since 2020. I'm sick of saying it. I think this group probably is, but I just hesitate to put that out there in the universe because I think each year we get maybe we overstate in the preseason how good we expect the offensive line to be.
That has been a major problem, and I've certainly been guilty as well. And so if you don't want to buy into the belief that I have or that you have about this offensive line, if you're listening and you say, hey, I need to see it, or I just flat out don't believe you, totally get it. No harm done. But I'm with you. And I do feel like that if you start talking, okay, if there's an early season injury to either of the two tackles, I think Olasolinen would be the first tackle in there. I agree with you there. I don't have it listed as that, but as I said, I only have guys listed in one spot. But I will say, I think the more problematic would be Olasolinen, or excuse me, Caden Proctor going down. Because while Olas has spent the entire spring working at left tackle, I think he would actually be a better fit at right tackle.
Agreed.
So but here's the thing, at some point, and I like how you brought up Michael Carroll, because I talk about Jackson Lloyd, but Carroll is certainly a guy who is in that conversation as well, where it's like they might reach a point where either or both of these freshmen ends up being the backup left tackle or the backup right tackle. And I think with Carroll, like I've seen some depth chart projections, it was strange. I mean, I know we probably saw him play a little bit of left tackle, but they had him projected as like the backup at left tackle. And it's like, I mean, did you pay attention at all this spring and just where guys were lining up? Because like this wasn't overly difficult to put it in this order, because this is kind of the way it looked.
That's the way it was. Huh?
I mean, and Carroll is, this is a guy that they thought was going to be a guard, and being a true freshman and stuff, he's not been in the system for 2+ years like Olas. So kicking him to the blind side when you're kind of thinking he was going to be a guard, maybe he ends up being a tackle, but I just think he's a better fit on the right side if that ends up happening. But I could see him end up being Wilkin-Formy's primary backup on the right side. I could see Jackson Lloyd at a certain point if an injury happens. Maybe it's Jackson Lloyd that comes in at left tackle if something happens to Caden Proctor. Now it will probably be a scenario kind of like you see at other positions where if it's a short-term thing with Proctor, they move Olas, they put him out there. But if it's something where it's like season ending and you've got to find a long-term solution, they open up a battle and you could end up seeing Jackson Lloyd win that battle. But that would just, hopefully that doesn't happen, because that would be not good. Caden Proctor is a critical piece to Alabama's success this season.
Maybe the most vital. I mean, I think anybody that doesn't know Alabama, and you say, who's the most important player to Alabama offense, you're going to get some automatic answer of Ryan Williams. But with Alabama's depth at wide receiver is great. You lose Proctor, you've fallen off a cliff at a tackle spot. I think Proctor, and to some extent even Formby, but Proctor in particular, absolutely irreplaceable based on the makeup of this. And I would say Proctor 1 and Brailsford maybe even second in terms of the most important players. Ty Simpson will be up there too, because I'm not sure the young quarterbacks will be ready in September. Right. I wouldn't bet against Kalen being pretty good in November, just to throw that out there. But in September, Ty Simpson is also vital, in my opinion.
100%. And with, like Wilkin-Formby, I think he's going to be really, really good this year. I do. I just think that when you start looking at Michael Carroll, you look at Olasolinen, like I think they're a better fit on the right side. I think you get better play out of both of those guys if they have to play right tackle compared to left tackle. Jackson Lloyd, probably the same way, even though it's like I think from an athletic standpoint, he's a future left tackle in my opinion.
He'll be the left tackle after Proctor, I think.
Yes, agreed. I'm right there with you. So yeah, this offensive line is set up for success in my opinion. I mean, when you talk about continuity factor, I mean, you had 4 out of your 5 guys at least played quite a bit of football together last year. Wilkin-Formby was obviously a starter when Caden Proctor wasn't. But he played a lot of football next to Jaden Roberts, and Jaden Roberts played a lot of football in between Wilkin Formby and Parker Brailsford.
Yeah.
And so you've got really one position that is new, but that newness, it doesn't have to be new. It could be Gino Vandermark, who also got a start, who also played 400 snaps or 300 plus snaps at guard last season. So you could have all 5 of your starters having experience with each other from last year. Or if you decide to go with Cam Dewberry, he's at least got SEC experience and quite a bit of it. So, there's no kind of adjustment period where he's like coming from a smaller school. This isn't Louisiana, like with Draylen Washington, where there's a step up in competition. Is how does he handle it? Like Cam Dewberry has played and seen the grind of the SEC. So that's solid. You start working into your depth, and we had questions there, but you got to feel good about Gino Vandermark. I think Joe Ionata is a guy who the coaching staff likes how he's developing. Rock Montgomery's got some guard center versatility. Will Sanders is a guy who generated a lot of buzz this spring. I think that's probably the fact that I have Rock being the third team center and I have Will Sanders being the second team right guard rather than having Rock as the second team. Like, I think that Sanders is a guy who is a perfect fit for this Kalen DeBoer offense, and he's going to do extremely well. Still needs to grow and develop. Hopefully they don't have to turn to him, and they won't, because he won't technically be the second team right guard. It'll be Gino Vandermark. And that's regardless of who starts between Dewberry and Vandermark, because if it's Vandermark that starts at left guard, if an injury happens at center or at right guard, Vandermark's going to slide over to one of those two spots, and Dewberry's going to come in at left guard. I guess it's possible Dewberry comes in at right guard if it's Roberts, but just the fact that Gino can play all three at a high level and there's continuity there, I think Dewberry would be like pretty much a left guard only. So that's kind of how I would view it. Jimmy, do you have anything else to add to the projections before we hop out of here?
Not all. Just share with you that I'm share the optimism about Will Sanders. I like him a lot too, and I've just noticed over the years, whenever an offensive lineman develops into a really good player, and I'm talking about even next level good, it often starts with, okay, who's athletic? Sanders is probably as athletic as anyone in that room. I mean, he's just a good athlete. Now, big, strong power, that's all going to come with time. And because of the presence of Jaden Roberts and Cam Dewberry and Gino Vandermark, he's got some time to get bigger and stronger. And I think as a redshirt sophomore, redshirt junior, Sanders going to be really good by then.
And, it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out when you watched his tape, his ability to pull and just bury people in space. First of all, it's not just a matter of getting out there in space and being in a position to get somebody blocked. It's hitting a moving target that does not want to be blocked. And you got to have the athleticism when it's a defensive back that's way quicker and he's trying to, get, whether he's using speed, whether he's trying to shake you or whatever. I mean, to be able to get your hands on those guys and get those guys blocked, it's not as easy as a lot of people think. He does that at an elite level. And when you talk about the pin and pulls, a lot of the stuff that, it's a very versatile run game, very versatile blocking scheme, but, stuff like that, it's going to be valued in this offense. So I think he's going to be a guy who ends up being a very, very good player for Alabama down the road. Jimmy, I appreciate you so much, man. I know we spent over an hour on here. We'll be doing the defense next week. This was fun. I needed this. We're getting to that point in the offseason where I'm like, man, I need something. Give me some news, guys. I need Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban to get some kind of verbal spat so we can have something to talk about. But this has been fun. This was very much needed. I hope everybody enjoyed it. We will definitely have to do this again soon, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Always enjoy these deep depth chart dives. It's mine and your favorite show and Nick Saban's least favorite show.
Yeah, I think he's coming around, though. I think he's going to watch this. He's like, you know what? They crushed that. That was incredible. See you next time, buddy.
Pearl River Resort.